Today we're gonna compare a high-end option to a sell your kidneys on the black market end option. Is going from high refresh rate 1440p at 27-inch to high refresh rate 4K at 27-inch worth the extra outlay? But before that, it's time for a sponsor for today's video so that I didn't have to actually sell one of my kidneys to buy this 4K monitor. Today's video is sponsored by Squarespace, for those of you that want to get your own website up and running without much of a hassle. Squarespace makes it super easy for you to get started on your new website, because they have more templates than you can wave a terrified GT710 at. Modifying these templates to fit your need is so easy that even I could do it. Squarespace also has a whole host of other features, like mobile optimized websites, so that your site will look good regardless of what device people are using it on. If you want to use your website to sell macaroni art finger painting, you can do that with Squarespace's powerful e-commerce features. On top of that, you can optimize the SEO of your finger paint sales so that you don't get lost in the Googles. If that sounds good to you, head over to squarespace.com for a free trial. And once you're done setting up your new site and you want to go live, use Squarespace/Dawid to get 10% off your first website purchase or domain purchase. Thank you again, Squarespace, for sponsoring today's video. Now for today's video, I'm going to focus more on the subjective differences in my opinion. I'm not going to be going into too much detail about various use cases and who should be looking at it and who shouldn't be, because Optimum Tech actually recently did a video where he goes into a lot of detail about that. And he does detailed breakdowns way better than I'd ever be able to. So I have that video linked in the description below for you to check out. This video is just going to be my subjective opinion. Considering that I've been lucky enough to actually live with both of these monitors for a while, being powered by a system that can handle both resolutions fairly well, I think that I can give you some insight into whether or not I think it's worth going from 1440p to 4K. But before we get into that, there is quite a lot that you need to bear in mind if you're actually considering going to 4K. Not only is the 4K high refresh rate monitor itself a lot more expensive than the 1440p options, the ViewSonic XG27 many numbers, which I'll show on the screen here, on Newegg at the moment costs about $480 US, whereas this Acer XB27 many numbers behind it is one of the cheaper high refresh rate 4K options, but on Newegg at the moment it still costs you about $850, which is a considerable difference. Although the hardware pricing market is less stable than the price of Bitcoin at the moment, so these prices do change quite regularly. In fact, I paid the equivalent of about $650 US for this 4K monitor, so yeah, there's a lot of leeway there. But you shouldn't only take into account the difference in price between the actual monitors, because it's a lot easier to game at 1440p 120 frames per second than it is to game at 4K 120 frames per second. Because remember, with 4K, every one of those frames is about 8.3 million pixels, which means to get 120 frames per second, your graphics card has to drive almost 1 billion pixels per second, and 1 billion of anything seems like way more than any one person should ever have access to. But anyway, basically 4K is a lot more difficult to drive than 1440p. Take Battlefield 5 being powered by an RTX 3080 for example. With high settings at 1440p, the system that I used for these tests gets around 160 frames per second at 1440p. Whereas if you knock it up to 4K, that frame rate drops down to 100 frames per second. Which, bear in mind, for 4K, high settings in Battlefield 5 is still very good, but it's a lot less than 160. Which means that you also have to take into account what system you're going to use to try and game on that monitor. In my opinion, at the moment, you shouldn't be considering anything less than like an RX 6800 XT or an RTX 3080 above to try and get high refresh rate 4K gaming at reasonable settings to still make it worth it. Now, up until this point, I've not given you any new information, have I? Obviously, 4K high refresh rate is a lot more difficult to drive than the already difficult to drive high refresh rate 1440p monitor situation. But do I think it's worth the additional outlay? Now, considering the current market values of graphics cards and monitors and stuff, I don't think anything's worth it. I think if you have a system, hold on to it for dear life and appreciate every moment with it until we can ride out this scalpocalypse that we're currently living in. But if we were looking at more MSRP prices, is the subjective difference between the two as big as the performance hit and the hit to your wallet would suggest? No, it really isn't. It obviously isn't, because at this point, you're very much getting into the territory of the law of diminishing returns. There isn't nearly as big a difference between 1440p and 4K as there is between 720p and 1080p, for example. But that doesn't mean that the difference doesn't matter. Now, I've spent ages being the two of these monitors side by side, and yes, you do kind of have to look for the differences in sharpness between the two monitors, and other than that, the experience is very similar. They're equally smooth in my opinion, and the rest of the gaming experience is similar. But that small difference in sharpness does actually add up to quite a big subjective difference to me. And the reason for that is because with the 1440p monitor, it is already very sharp, but at a pretty close distance to the monitor, you can still see individual pixels. They are tiny, but I can still see them, which kind of reminds your brain that you're looking at a monitor displaying an image. Whereas with the 4K high refresh rate monitor, again sitting fairly close, you can't see the individual pixels, which kind of removes a pretty big visual artifact that monitors have, which is the kind of jagginess of the individual pixels stitched together to make an image. So it feels less like you're looking at a monitor displaying an image and more like you're looking through a window into a game, which sounds really stupid, and I feel stupid saying it, but it genuinely is that kind of difference. So at the end of the day, is the windowness of the 4K gaming experience worth the extra outlay? If you're one of the lucky 15 people that already have an RTX 3080 or an RX 6800 XT, graphics cards that only really start stretching their legs at 4K, then I think it definitely is worth going for a high refresh rate 4K monitor, because you get the extra sharpness and windowiness of the 4K gaming experience, but you don't have to sacrifice smoothness and input lag and stuff like that like you used to, and I think that's pretty cool. But honestly, for everybody else, 1080p is still honestly the best option. Like the fact that at the moment you can, for not much money, buy a 1080p IPS high refresh rate monitor with FreeSync and G-Sync in it means that the budget gamer has access to really good image quality. And then you don't need a super powerful graphics card to be able to power that good image quality. So yeah, in conclusion, is 4K high refresh rate worth it? Only if you already have a graphics card that's super overpowered, and actually 1080p is still the best option. So yeah, with that bombshell, thank you very much for watching. If you liked the video, like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this one, and until the next video, bye bye.